Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. This time we're tackling a pretty heavy subject, the 9/11 attacks.
It's definitely a topic that continues to resonate even after all these years.
You guys have given us so much material for this deep dive. It's clear that you want to go way beyond just the surface level. You want to understand the intricacies, the what-ifs, the lasting impacts.
Right, and all while boosting your English skills along the way.
Exactly. That's what I call a challenge.
Well, I think what's so fascinating about 9/11 is that the story doesn't really begin on that tragic September morning.
Oh, I totally agree.
To really understand Al-Qaeda and the minds behind the attacks, we need to rewind the clock way back.
So true. It's crazy how much planning went into this. This wasn't just some spur-of-the-moment thing, right?
Oh, absolutely not.
We're talking years of preparation, dedication. Some of these guys even went through elite Al-Qaeda training camps.
Precisely. For example, some of these individuals attended training at the Mizainak camp in Afghanistan.
Wow.
Now, this wasn't specifically for 9/11,
Okay.
but it shows you the level of commitment.
That's some serious dedication to a terrifying cause. And it's amazing how these guys mastered the art of blending in. I mean, can you imagine investigators finding one of the hijackers listed in the San Diego phone book?
That's shocking, isn't it?
Talk about a shock. By the way, hijacker, that's a key word here. Make sure you take note of it. A hijacker is someone who illegally takes control of an aircraft, ship, or vehicle while it's in transit.
It's a term we sadly became all too familiar with after 9/11.
Yeah. Their planning was meticulous. It's chilling. But to understand their actions, I think we need to understand their motivations, their why.
You're absolutely right. And that brings us to the security failures, because let's be honest, there were some missed opportunities.
Do you think these failures were due to a lack of information or more of failure to connect the dots? It's like having all the puzzle pieces, but not knowing how they fit together.
It was a bit of both, actually. Take the case of Khalid al-Mihdhar and Nawaf al-Hazmi. The CIA actually knew that these two guys had met with a known Al-Qaeda operative in Malaysia. But that crucial information never made it to the FBI.
Wow.
Had it reached the FBI, their entry into the US might have been prevented.
That's incredible.
This is a prime example of why intelligence sharing is so crucial. Think of it like a relay race. If the baton isn't passed smoothly, the team falters.
That's a great analogy and a good reminder to jot down intelligence sharing.
Yeah.
It's the exchange of information between different organizations, especially those involved in national security.
Exactly.
And then there's the case of Zacarias Moussaoui, the so-called 20th hijacker. I mean, they had him in custody.
Yeah.
But bureaucratic hurdles prevented them from searching his belongings,
Can you believe that?
which could have held vital information.
Absolutely. These failures really highlight the need for seamless communication and swift action within intelligence agencies.
Yeah.
Now let's shift gears a bit to the day itself, September 11th, 2001.
Can you paint a picture for us of the immediate response? What was happening on the ground and in the halls of power?
It was utter chaos. I mean, imagine this. Air traffic controllers frantically trying to track these rogue planes. First responders rushing into burning buildings. The government scrambling to make sense of what was happening. It was a day of unimaginable horror, but also of incredible bravery.
It's hard to even comprehend, isn't it? Reading the accounts, I'm always struck by the courage of the first responders, especially the firefighters. Knowing that the South Tower had already collapsed, many still chose to stay near the North Tower, hoping to save more lives.
It's just extraordinary.
That level of selflessness.
It truly is. Amidst the tragedy, there were just countless acts of courage and selflessness, people helping strangers, becoming heroes.
Yeah.
It really speaks to the resilience of the human spirit.
Absolutely. Now, what about the government? What were their immediate actions in the aftermath?
Well, the government had to act quickly and decisively, both domestically and internationally.
Right.
President Bush issued an ultimatum to the Taliban: hand over bin Laden or face military action.
Whoa.
And just a month later, the U.S. launched airstrikes against Al-Qaeda and Taliban targets in Afghanistan.
That marked the beginning of what we now call the War on Terror, didn't it? It's such a loaded term, both powerful and complex.
Yeah.
Can you unpack it a bit for us?
Sure. The War on Terror encompasses a whole range of activities: military operations, diplomatic efforts, intelligence gathering, all aimed at combating terrorism worldwide. It's reshaped global politics and security measures. but it's also sparked debates about the balance between security and civil liberties.
Of course.
And remember, making note of these key terms like ultimatum and war on terror will help you solidify your understanding of the events and improve your English vocabulary.
That's such a good point.
Always be learning.
One example of that debate is the Patriot Act, right? Which expanded the government's surveillance powers. Some argue that this came at the cost of individual privacy.
It's true. It's a complex issue with no easy answers.
Absolutely.
And that's where critical thinking comes in. It's crucial to examine these long-term consequences of 9/11 from multiple perspectives.
For sure. Another example is biometric screening, like using fingerprints in photographs at borders. It became way more common after 9/11. It's a tool that can help track potential terrorists, but it also raises concerns about data privacy and potential misuse.
Exactly. These are complex issues, and it's so important for us to engage in these discussions and understand all the nuances.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
9/11 continues to shape our world, and understanding its implications is crucial for informed citizens like yourselves.
I couldn't agree more.
Okay, so we've talked about the meticulous planning and the missed signals leading up to 9/11. But to really grasp the magnitude of this event, don't you think we need to understand the motivations of the attackers? What led them to commit such a horrific act?
You're absolutely right. To understand al-Qaeda, we need to try and step into their shoes, see the world through their lens.
Right.
Their ideology, rooted in a very particular interpretation of Islam, views America as this hostile force, a symbol of Western decadence and oppression.
So you're talking about that extremist ideology we touched on earlier.
Right.
The one that justifies violence against America and its allies as a holy war, a jihad.
Exactly. And while it's crucial to understand this perspective, it's equally important to remember that this is a very fringe interpretation. It's not representative of the vast majority of Muslims.
Right.
But for al-Qaeda, this worldview was their fuel, their driving force.
It's unsettling to think that an ideology like that could fuel this level of hatred and violence.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, where did it all begin? What historical events shaped the formation of al-Qaeda?
Well, to understand this deep-seated hatred, we need to go back to a pivotal event that really shaped the worldview of many future al-Qaeda members: the Soviet-Afghan War in the 1980s. The U.S., while supporting Afghan Mujahideen fighters against the Soviet Union, inadvertently helped create a breeding ground for extremism.
The blowback effect. Actions having unintended consequences down the line. Seems like history is full of them.
Precisely. And many future al-Qaeda members, including bin Laden himself, gained experience and formed networks during this conflict. It's like a dark echo of history, where the seeds of 9/11 were sown decades earlier.
So after the Soviet withdrawal, these battle-hardened fighters didn't just disappear, did they?
No, they didn't.
They were looking for new targets, new enemies.
Their focus shifted to what they perceived as American imperialism and its influence in the Muslim world. They were particularly enraged by the presence of U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia, the birthplace of Islam.
So this resentment towards the U.S. was building. But how did this localized resentment transform into a global terrorist network capable of such sophisticated attacks?
Well, bin Laden, with his charisma and resources, played a pivotal role. He established training camps in Sudan and later Afghanistan, attracting recruits from all corners of the Muslim world. These camps became their breeding ground, their universities of terror.
Were these camps just about instilling extremist ideology, or did they also provide practical training for carrying out attacks?
It was both. They instilled extremist ideology and taught practical skills for carrying out attacks. But perhaps more importantly, they fostered a sense of camaraderie, a shared purpose among these individuals, many of whom felt alienated and disenfranchised.
It's a twisted parallel to finding your tribe, isn't it?
It is.
But instead of a shared love for music or art, it's a shared hatred and desire for violence.
Right.
And these camps produced a generation of skilled operatives, capable of planning and executing attacks far beyond anything the world had seen before.
Exactly. And it's vital to recognize that this wasn't just theoretical. Before 9/11, there were warning signs, attacks that demonstrated al-Qaeda's growing reach and lethality.
You're referring to attacks like the 1993 World Trade Center, bombing the attacks on U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania in 1998, and the attack on the USS Cole in 2000.
Exactly.
It seems that they were sending a message, showing the world that they were a force to be reckoned with.
Yes. It was a clear escalation. They were testing the waters, honing their skills, and making it known that they wouldn't be ignored. And yet, despite these red flags, the U.S. response was often reactive and fragmented. Intelligence agencies struggled to connect the dots, and there was a real lack of a cohesive strategy to address this evolving threat.
It's almost as if everyone was busy putting out small fires while a wildfire was brewing in the distance.
A good analogy.
Were there any concrete indications that the U.S. government was aware of a larger imminent threat?
It's a complex picture. There are intelligence reports suggesting that bin Laden was planning something big, but they lacked specific details about the time, place, or method of attack. It was a classic case of trying to decipher the fog of war.
So you have these vague threats, but no clear picture of the target or the timing. And on top of that, there were serious communication breakdowns between intelligence agencies, right?
Absolutely. One striking example is the Phoenix memo. An FBI agent in Arizona sent this memo to headquarters warning that Middle Eastern men were enrolling in flight schools potentially for terrorist purposes. But this memo was never properly investigated or shared with other agencies. It's a classic case of vital information slipping through the cracks.
It's frustrating to think that with better communication and coordination, the attacks might have been prevented. But hindsight is always 20/20, isn't it? It's easy to analyze and critique after the fact, but in the moment, things were much more chaotic and uncertain.
You're right. We need to avoid getting caught up in what-if scenarios. Instead, let's focus on learning from these failures so we can better protect ourselves in the future.
So what are some key takeaways from this deep dive into the events leading up to 9/11? What lessons can we learn from this tragedy?
One crucial lesson is the importance of recognizing and adapting to new threats. The U.S. was really slow to grasp the nature of al-Qaeda, an enemy that operated outside traditional state structures and was willing to use unconventional tactics.
It's like trying to fight a guerrilla war with conventional army tactics. You need to be agile, adaptable, and willing to think outside the box.
Exactly. Another key takeaway is the need for effective intelligence sharing and collaboration between agencies. Silos and turf wars have no place in counterterrorism. We need a seamless flow of information and a shared understanding of the threat.
And this need for collaboration extends beyond national borders, doesn't it? Terrorism is a global issue, so our response needs to be global as well, collaborative.
Absolutely. 911 was a wake-up call, a reminder that we live in an interconnected world where threats can emerge from unexpected places and require a coordinated global response.
So how do we apply these lessons to our own lives? How can we as individuals contribute to a safer and more understanding world?
It starts with critical thinking and media literacy. We're constantly bombarded with information, and it's crucial to evaluate sources, question assumptions, and form our own informed opinions.
Right.
We need to be discerning consumers of information, especially in today's age of social media and online echo chambers.
It all comes back to that old adage, don't believe everything you read. We need to be critical thinkers, question what we see and hear, and do our own research.
Precisely. And on a more personal level, this deep dive encourages us to be more aware of our surroundings, to notice things that seem out of place, and to report anything suspicious to authorities. It's about being vigilant, but not letting fear control our lives.
It's that see something, say something mentality, right? Being proactive rather than reactive. It's about taking responsibility for our own safety and the safety of our communities.
Exactly. We all have a role to play in keeping our communities safe. And while we can't eliminate all risks, we can be informed, prepared, and vigilant.
And speaking of being informed, let's quickly review some key English vocabulary we've encountered today. We've discussed ideology, jihad, blowback training camps, red flags, and fog of war.
Right.
These are powerful terms, and understanding their nuances can help you express yourself more effectively in English.
Now let's shift our focus to the immediate aftermath of the 9/11 attacks. Remember those chaotic scenes we described earlier? Well, we're going to delve deeper into the response both on the ground and in the halls of power.
We'll explore stories of heroism and resilience, but also the political decisions and consequences that shape the world we live in today. Stay tuned, because we're about to enter a whole new chapter in this deep dive.
Yeah.
We've spent a good amount of time now dissecting the events leading up to 9/11, but I'm curious about that immediate aftermath.
Yeah.
It must have been just a whirlwind of emotions and decisions for everyone.
Oh, absolutely. In those initial days and weeks following the attacks, there was this incredible outpouring of grief and solidarity, not just within the U.S., but globally. It was a moment where it felt like people from all walks of life, all corners of the world, just recognized the shared humanity of this tragedy.
Yeah, and that's something that I think sometimes gets overshadowed by the political narratives.
Oh, for sure.
The human cost of 9/11 was immense. Thousands of innocent lives, lost families, shattered communities, forever scarred. It's so important to remember the victims. and the ripple effect of their absence.
Absolutely. While we delve into the political landscape and all of that, it's so essential to just hold space for that profound human impact. And amidst the grief and the devastation, there were also these remarkable acts of heroism.
Oh, yeah.
First responders, everyday citizens putting their lives on the line to save others. Those stories are a testament to the human spirit's capacity for courage and compassion, even in the face of unimaginable horror.
We've talked about the firefighters, but let's not forget the police officers, paramedics, and all the ordinary people who just stepped up to help. Those stories remind us that even in the darkest moments, there's light to be found.
Exactly. And while these individual acts of courage were unfolding, the U.S. government was facing immense pressure to act on a larger scale, to respond to this attack and to prevent future ones.
Right.
The war on terror became the dominant policy.
Right.
Really far-reaching consequences, both domestically and internationally.
We touched on the Patriot Act earlier, but that was really just the beginning. The U.S. launched military operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, expanded surveillance powers, implemented stricter security measures at airports and borders. It was a complete overhaul of how we approach security and the balance between freedom and safety.
You're right, it was a turning point, and that raises a critical question. Did these measures actually make us safer? Or did they erode our civil liberties without effectively preventing future attacks? It's a debate that continues to this day with valid arguments on both sides.
It's like walking a tightrope, isn't it?
It is.
You want to protect yourself and your country, but not at the expense of the very freedoms you're trying to defend. Finding that balance is a constant challenge.
It is, and the impact of the war on terror extended far beyond U.S. borders. It led to increased cooperation between intelligence agencies worldwide, a heightened focus on counterterrorism efforts, and unfortunately new conflicts in various regions.
It reshaped the geopolitical landscape in ways that we're still grappling with today. Alliances shifted, power dynamics evolved, and the world became both more interconnected and more divided along certain ideological lines.
Hit the nail on the head. And when we look back at the source material you provided, it's clear that you're seeking a deep understanding not just of the facts of 9/11, but the complexities and the long-term consequences.
Exactly. It's about understanding how this event continues to shape our lives, how it influences global politics, and what lessons we can learn to create a safer and more understanding future.
It's about looking beyond the immediate impact and considering the ripple effects across time and geography. How do we prevent future tragedies without compromising our values? How do we foster a world where understanding triumphs over fear and division?
It's a tall order.
It is.
But I think it starts with open dialogue, critical thinking, and a willingness to learn from history.
I completely agree. We need to engage in these difficult conversations, challenge our own assumptions, and strive for a world where peace and understanding prevail.
Well, this deep dive has been a roller coaster of emotions. From the meticulous planning of the attacks to the incredible acts of courage and the complex political landscape that emerged in the aftermath. It's been a journey.
It's a lot to process, no doubt. But by examining these events in detail, by exploring different perspectives and grappling with the tough questions, we can gain a much deeper understanding of this pivotal moment in history and its lasting impact on the world.
Exactly. And remember, this deep dive is just the beginning of your exploration. We've provided a framework, a set of tools to help you navigate this complex terrain. Now it's up to you to continue digging, asking questions, and forming your own informed opinions.
And as you continue your journey, don't forget the importance of language. Words like solidarity, heroism, overhaul, tightrope, geopolitical, and reconciliation. These are powerful terms that can really help you articulate your thoughts and engage in meaningful conversations about these complex issues.
So until our next deep dive, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep striving for a world where understanding triumphs over ignorance and peace prevails over violence.